Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Hi, Liz.
Hi, good morning.
Morning, Linda.
How are y'all?
Yeah. Okie dokie. How are you, Liz?
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, Estelle.
Estelle.
My eye is starting to act up again
That same.
with the tearing and the crusting it.
Morning.
Good morning,
Morning,
Linda.
Linda.
Good morning. Good morning.
How's your father?
He is one day at a time, but he seems to be doing okay. He's in St. Louis with my sister. He and Judy, his wife, are staying with my sister for a while, and they are getting round-the-clock care.
How's
And
Judy's health?
she is, in general, good health. She has aches and pains, but the worry of what's going on with my father has been a weight on her shoulders, and my sister's bringing them down there has been a blessing for them. So they are being well taken care of.
She's got a lot of kids. Are they all still in St. Louis?
No, but she does have several in St. Louis, several that are married, and a couple that are not married. On paper, one of the things that makes this such a good move is that her husband, my brother-in-law, is an emergency room physician, and 3 of her daughters are nurses, and so is one of the daughters-in-law, and they're all there. So besides just having young, able-bodied people to help out, there is, like medically aware people that are there. And they have a space for them, which they laid out beautifully. And so they're in the best circumstances that we could imagine. And so.
Under the circumstances.
Right, under the circumstances. And so everything should continue to be well. And my father should get better. He does seem to be incrementally getting better.
Excellent.
And I'm very grateful to learn with you guys. I missed you. Thank you. We are in chapter 14 of Bamidbar. We're post the report from the travelers, from our tourists, and God has, starting in verse 11, I'm fairly certain we read this part because I remember some elements of it being a part of discussion. So I'm assuming we read this part. I'm pretty sure we did. So in the narrative, in verse 10, we are at our absolute low point. The Ada, this community, this gathering, some community or gathering, has already started speaking about stoning Yoshua and Kalev. And then God shows up. Obviously, he's there the whole time. But it says that the glory of God was seen was made seen at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And God speaks to Moshe. And so now we're in verse 11. So God says to Moshe, like, how long is this people going to rebel against me? How long is it going to take before they trust me? After all the signs, all the wonders which I did in its midst. And then he says, I'm going to strike the people with a plague and sort of wipe them out. And I'm going to use you and to be a nation greater and more substantial than them. And then Moshe responds. So this is very reminiscent of what happened after the golden calf. After the golden calf, God says something very similar to Moshe, that he's going to wipe the people out and restart with him. Just as an aside, he's going to restart with him. He is an old man at this point. He's not too old to be president of the United States, but he seems to be an old man to be the father of a great nation. He's like in his 80s at this point. But we've already seen that doesn't stop God, because Abraham was even older when he told him he's going to make a nation through him, and he did, even older. But anyways, he tells Moshe that that's what he's going to do. Now, back with the golden calf, when he told that to Moshe's, which by the way it's in the Torah portion a few weeks from now. So that would have been around chapter 30 something ish. In chapter 32, yeah, it is 32, right? Yeah, it's in 32. God says in verse 7, God declares to Moshe, go down, for the people who you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to leave the way that I ordered them to follow. They have made themselves a cast metal calf. They've bowed down and offered sacrifices to it, exclaiming, this is Israel is your God who brought you out of Egypt. God then says to Moshe, I have observed the people. They're an unbending group. Now, do not try to stop me when I unleash my wrath against them to destroy them, and I will then make you into a great nation. Moshe begins to plead before God, and he says, oh God, why unleash your wrath against the people who you brought up out of Egypt with great power and show of force? Why should Egypt be able to say that you took them out with evil intentions to kill them in the hill country and wipe them out from the face of the earth? Withdraw your displays of anger and refrain from doing evil to your people. Remember your servants, Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. You swore to them by your very essence and declared to them that you would make their descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky, giving their descendants the land you promised them so that they would be able to occupy it forever. God refrained from doing the evil that he planned for his people. So this seems to be almost a replay of that moment. Now, Rabbi Foreman suggests over here in the Exodus one, in chapter 32 in Exodus, Rabbi Foreman suggests that, first of all, the Midrash notices this, that God says to him, do not try to stop me when I unleash my wrath. So the Medrash, and this is amplified by many of the commentaries, point to this moment, this line, as God giving permission to Moshe. In other words, sort of hinting to Moshe when he says, "Don't try to stop me." That's actually a clue to try to stop me. And that's when, and Moshe takes the hint, and he makes his effort. Now, his effort is a kind of reasoned argument. That's what he's trying to do, a kind of reasoned argument that the Egyptians will misunderstand what's going on, and also he made a promise to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that is going to end up not being fulfilled. Now, technically you could answer that God said he's going to make a new nation out of Moshe. So technically, whoever is going to be this new nation is still going to be from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So that needs thinking. What argument is that? Because again, God is saying, I'm going to build them out of you. I will make you into a great nation. It could be that what Moshe is arguing in the second one is that if you do that, I will end up being the father of the nation. And we already have fathers. People will speak of me as the great patriarch because you built everything out of me, so it will kind of erase the significance of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but that doesn't sound fully satisfying. Technically, he is a descendant, and technically, whoever comes from him will still be from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and their promise will technically be fulfilled. So that one requires some thought. The first one is the one he's going to evoke again in our chapter, which is, what will Egypt think? Now, you could ask yourself, who cares what Egypt will think? But there's been an indication already earlier in the beginning of the book of Shmos that God really does care what the Egyptians think. Initially, when he discusses why these plagues are happening in Egypt, he indicates that it's to teach the Egyptians about him. Right? It's not a pragmatic vehicle to get the Jewish people out of Egypt. It's a teaching moment for the Egyptians, to teach them about his nature, that he is everybody's God. He is the God of all of creation. And when Paro says, "Who is this God that you speak of?" I think I'm quoting Yul Brenner. I know not who this God is who you speak of. Maybe not exactly. So when he says, "I don't know this four-letter name, I don't know this God that you're speaking of," that is the beginning of a lesson. Moshe's talking to him about a deity, a notion perhaps of deity that the Egyptians are not entirely familiar with. I have seen in popular articles about Egyptian culture that many think they were ripe for the notion of monotheism. That in their culture, I don't know much about this, but I've seen, popular writing that it makes sense that they would have been a kind of culture out of which monotheism could emerge on the broader amongst the broad masses of people, because they weren't terribly far from the notion of monotheism. And that might be the case, but the actual the introduction viscerally to a notion of a deity that is the creator of everything and manages everything and is involved in the workings of creation, that they don't have. So, and this is the understanding of many of the commentaries, that the purpose of each one of those plagues is to gradually present the notion of God's place as creator and manager of creation. So it switches. At some point, it does switch, and the lesson, and you see in the later plagues that the lesson starts to be more directed at the Jewish people. But that seems to be because the Egyptians are stubbornly refusing to learn it, to accept the fact of God as creator and manager of creation. And so then it shifts to be primarily for the Jewish people. But when you look at the language in the early parts of the plagues, it is the languages that this is to teach the Egyptians. May not find it right away. Anyways, trust me on that. Even the very fact that the plagues don't really strike the Jews, they only strike the Egyptians. I don't have the language right now. But anyways, so it even goes so far as Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, a blessed memory, he suggested that when there's a back and forth between Moshe and Paro, or Moshe keeps on asking for permission for the Jews to go out and have a holiday in the desert. And they're going back and forth over the details of it. But there's this holiday that's supposed to happen in the desert, and it never stops. Moshe continues to ask for it. At first, it just seems like a pretense so that the Jews could then just leave. But it remains consistent all the way to the end, this thing about the Jews going out. So let's say that Paro had agreed to let the people go for this 3-day holiday. It goes all the way to Bishalach, because it says, and then Paro saw that they're not coming back after the 3 days. So this pretense has this notion of a holiday in the desert seems to be a consistent thing. What if Paro had agreed and allowed the people to go? So what would the scenario have been? Moshe says they're just going for a holiday. So he imagines that the people would have gone to the desert and received the Torah. That's the holiday Moshe is talking about. So they would have gone to the desert, received the Torah, and then they would have come back into Egypt. Now, eventually, they would have to leave because the promise is that the Jewish people are going to be in the land of Canaan, not live in the land of Egypt. So they would have eventually had to leave, but they would have come back after receiving the Torah, and Egypt would have had this close personal contact with the people as they are sort of transformed by the event and imbued with the kind of light of receiving the Torah. And this would have had a kind of indirect impact on the Egyptians. And that this is a kind of unspoken understanding that moves throughout Tanakh. Sometimes it's spoken of poetically, that ultimately it's not the goal just for the Jewish people to be a nation in relationship with God, but ultimately it is the goal that the Jews are a kind of conduit of divinity to the rest of the world, like Kohanim, like we're called Mamleches Kohanim. We're a kind of agent, a kind of conduit, a kind of channel of the divine to the rest of the world, because God has interest in the entire world being in relationship with him, not just the Jewish people. The Kuzari, I'm pretty sure Rabbi Yehuda Halevi discusses this, and Ramosha Chaim Luzzatto in The Way of God talks about this, that there was a kind of breakdown in the relationship between man and God that is finally expressed in the Tower of Babel. And so there needs to be somebody and some people now, instead of just God in direct relationship with all of mankind, there needs to be somebody or some people who are kind of a conduit to the rest of the world. But it was always the intent that the rest of the world is going to be uplifted in relationship with God. It's just how to do it. So the Jewish people become this vehicle. In a certain way, Moshe becomes this for the Jewish people. He doesn't want it. He reluctantly allows this at Sinai. But that's how the people see him. And that might be part of what went wrong at the golden calf, that the Jewish people are not supposed to have conduit, in that sense. But the entire Jewish people are meant to be in relationship with God. Certainly that's what Moshe seems to be telling the people at Sinai. Don't step back. He seems to be suggesting, and this is reviewed in a different way, a slightly different way, in the Torah portion of Veschanan, where Moshe is, he believes that the entire people are supposed to have a relationship with God directly, not through conduits. There is a concession that's made. There's a Mishkan, and then there's Kohanim. But ultimately, we are supposed to be in direct relationship with God, and the rest of the world, perhaps, is supposed to be experiencing through Israel as a conduit. So this is just, very vaguely present during the plagues, but it is prominent in Moshe's argument, because he's asking, what will the Egyptians think? If we're gone and you do this to us, what chance do they have? They are it's not simply that they're going to come up with misinformation, but they are going to lose the conduit that you're setting up. They're not going to have this connection via the Jewish people. So this is his argument, the first part of the argument. Again, the last part of the argument is still needs work, but to understand it. But the first part of the argument, which is the part that he repeats in our section, seems to be about that. He mentions it more broadly. It's not just going to be the Egyptians now, it's going to be the broader nations of the world. So it's what Rabbi Foreman calls a kind of, I don't know, theological argument or political argument. And that's before God reveals to him that there is a notion of mercy, that he also can just plain ask for mercy, even though the people have done something wrong, and justice would require a response. There's something built in to God's relationship with creation that is mercy, and he introduces him to the idea that the path of mercy works, and he sort of teaches it to him at Sinai over there in that chapter 32.
In the rock. When he's in, when Moshe asks him to show him.
And he goes into
and now Moshe is using his argument back at God.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, he brings up this notion of what will the nations think, which, in other words, they're going to just think that you didn't have the power to bring them into the land. And that's why you had to wipe them out in the desert, which would mean that you're not the creator, you're not the all-powerful one. But then he maintains what we would call argument number one from Shmos, and then he brings in the attributes of mercy, which God had showed him at the event of the golden calf. There's also another interesting feature here, which is that when in the previous Torah portion, we saw Moshe collapsing when the people complained about that they wanted meat. And Moshe said, his language was, I cannot hold them. Echa esa levadi. How can I hold them alone? I can't hold them. I can't carry them. Am I their nursemaid? Imagine him just like holding the people to his breast like a nursemaid. Am I their nursemaid? And he says, kill me now, because if that's what I'm supposed to be, because I can't hold them. But he doesn't say, he said, Echa esa levadi, how can I hold them on my own? So God's response over there is, I'm going to get some other people to help you with this. And now it's interesting. He uses this language. It's language of that he was taught, but it's interesting language because in verse 18, when he speaks of God being like long to anger, he has much love, Rav Chesed, nosei avon, he holds sin. In other words, God can hold them. God can hold them, even in this situation. It's an interesting kind of turn where he said, I can't hold them at that point, and was on the point of collapse. But he seems to be saying to God, you can hold them. You're capable of holding them. And it seems like almost, again, this is language that has appeared before, but in the context that it's written, it almost brings you back to that moment when Moshe felt like there's too much being asked of him, and he uses this notion. The fact that he is able to stand and speak to God in this way seems to, it almost is like he's saying, look, I couldn't do it, but you can do this. Like I was ready to collapse, but you could do this. You're capable of doing this, which is this kind of, you're asking, when you say no say avon bafesha, what you're saying is that you can hold them even as they are filled with sin. In other words, they are rebelling. That's how God characterized it. They're rebelling against me. They don't trust me. And so the image you have, especially if you connect it back to his image of a nursemaid, so you have a kind of mother figure, God as a kind of mother figure who's holding up a child who is rebelling against them and fighting them. And Moshe's saying, I mean, because he was taught this, but Moshe's saying, you can hold them even in this situation. You can bear them. Even before that, about the nosei avon, it's Rav Chesed. Chesed is often translated as loving kindness, but it can also mean just love. So so you imagine this embrace of love of someone, in this case, the persona of the Jewish people, but you have this embrace of love where even when the person is lashing out and the person doesn't trust and the person is rebelling, God as a kind of mother figure is embracing the child and embracing them and can hold them. This is part of the power of God. He can hold the people even when they're like this.
Rabbi,
yeah.
A few things, if it's okay. I never realized how much this whole section is a dialogue between Moshe and God. I mean, all the things we learned back and forth. But just one, getting back to the conduit that we were, we're a conduit to Egypt, and that might. I also think it works the other way. I mean, Egypt is with us all the time. We say in everything, Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. We do not get away from Egypt, even today, even, there's something about it. There's something about it.
You could say, even in imagery, that Egypt is the womb of the Jewish people, that we are born out of Egypt. And you have that kind of funny image where Moshe, I think Aviva Zornberg speaks of this directly, but I don't remember where. But when the Midrash says that when God spoke to Moshe at the burning bush, he used Moshe's father's voice. So whose voice was that? Was it Amram's voice or is it Paro's voice? Who's his father? Who's his father? Who raised him? That father is Paro. Who is his biological father and may have been there, until he was like 2 when Yocheved weans him. Is Amram. So we jump to assume it's talking about Amram's voice, but there's a kind of tantalizing possibility that he's speaking to him with Pharaoh's voice. And
Hmm.
also that story when Moshe is or it's not,
A
it's
crazy
unclear what
story.
happened.
Yeah.
Either Moshe's circumcised, it sounds like one of Moshe's sons are circumcised by Tzipporah. But that kind of dreamlike sequence when Moshe is traveling down to Egypt with his family, and he is saved because it seems like one of his sons is circumcised by Tzipporah. So there is this view of that moment that Moshe is struggling, that this is a kind of internal vision of Moshe. Moshe's having this as a kind of internal vision. And the struggle is, who is he? Is he an Egyptian or is he a Jew? Because it has to be, when he finally faces up to Paro, he has to have decided, and so he has this kind of struggle, the end of which is that his son is circumcised. In other words, circumcision, which is a covenant with Avram. So he's at the end of the dream, he's chosen. Maybe that might be the purpose of that moment, that by the time it's over, he moves as a Jew, and only as a Jew, and that's how he's going to approach Paro. He's not going to approach him as an Egyptian who happens to be Jewish, but he's going to approach him as a Jew and a leader of the Jewish people. But you see, so these might be little pieces that are part of that broader discussion of what is the Jewish relationship to Egypt, like Lois is talking about.
Doesn't it even say when was a nation taken out of another nation?
Right,
Isn't that even
a birth? Sounds like
a birth?
Right,
It's
exactly. And they use that word Mitzrayim. There are those who focus on the etymology of some of these words, the Hebrew etymology. So Mitzrayim means a place of Meitzarim, narrows. So it's like a birth canal. And then the people, especially when we cross the sea, it's like the amniotic sac is breaking. And that the waters of birth. And so you could say that Egypt is the womb out of which the Jewish people emerge, and that would mean we have very strong connection to them, and that again might have been very important when it comes to how are we going to be a conduit. Nowadays, it's almost messianic when you read the news about how much focus there is on Jewish behavior. We associate it with the mystery of anti-Semitism, but you could say it's like weirdly almost messianic in that the rest of the world is so focused on the Jewish people. Like you could have asked somebody in theory, let's say you were talking to somebody who's like a media consultant, and you're asking a media consultant, what would you do in a situation where you've got everybody's attention? So, depending on who he's consulting for, he would want to make the most out of this moment. If everybody, it's not, how often do you have everybody's attention on what you're doing? So you'd want to make, you'd want to, like, it's almost like everything's there that you need. You have everybody's attention for a moment. So how do you make the most out of that? How would you make the most out of that? That seems to be the only piece that's missing from this being almost a messianic thing. Like how is it possible? You have a group of people that happen to live somewhere that how are they going to influence the rest of the world? It's a small nation, not necessarily that interesting of a people, compared to what's going on around the rest of the world. But somehow the people have become a focus of everybody's attention. You'd think you'd need just something, kind of taking the opportunity to send a message, while you have everybody's opportunity to turn this into truly a messianic kind of moment. But yes, so having this kind of connection, being in some ways born out of Egypt, also that you even see that there are commandments not to go back to Egypt, which, this fear that we will go back to Egypt, that we are from Egypt and we're connected to Egypt, but we need to form our own and forge our own identity. The connection is there, but we need to fully realize our own independent identity. But how will you influence the other people? Because you have a connection. You certainly you have a connection. And even again, when God responds to Moshe and he said, all right, I will forgive them like you said, according to your words, I will forgive them. Then God goes on and he says, by my life, and he goes on to say, the glory of God fills the whole earth. Everybody who sees me and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the desert, they are testing me 10 times. They don't listen to me. It sounds like he's saying that the purpose of filling the earth and doing these signs was to promote the connection between him and the people and their trust in him. Now, that word, I've been translating it as trust. The word is emunah, which often is translated as believe, but it depends on context. Ramon Shapiro, blessed memory, said that in most contexts in these sections in Shmos, it means more trust than belief. But it doesn't lose the meaning of belief either. In other words, in a trusting relationship, each time you're expected to trust somebody and then they fulfill your trust, you're learning something new about them, because you were tested because something was going on you didn't know for sure, and then the person comes through, and each time the person comes through, that's a revelation of a new aspect of the person. So let's say you have a relationship with somebody and they tell you, stay here, I'm going to come back. And then it takes a while for them to come back and you're not sure, are they going to come back? Are they going to come back? And then they finally come back. So you learned something new about them. You were pretty sure that they would come back, but now you've seen a new level of kind of reliability. And that's another lesson about God. So it seems like that might even be part of that thing of they tested me 10 times, right? And what does it mean? Let's say when a child tests their parents, it's, because part of what they're testing is, can I trust you? Are you really there for me? Or they might be testing, are these rules really serious? Like what happens if I break the rules? But even there, it's not just testing the boundaries of the rules, it's also testing the relationship. What happens when I break the rules? Are you going to still be there? Are you going to still love me? Or do you only love me when I do everything right or correct? So and each time, he's that they're testing him, he comes back. There's no water, he provides water. There's no food, he provides food. He, whatever it is that they're complaining about, maybe even when they test that thing about not collecting the money on Shabbos, or he's each time, and even maybe the golden calf after that terrible breach, he's still with them. So this is, it's a right. So it's a kind of, each one of them is in some sense, a new revelation about the relationship. You can start with a certain degree of trust, but certainly this is what children do. They're testing it to see how far does this go, and so that was going on, and so that seems to be part. And he says, I even showed them the land. They saw what it is. And then, he brings up Kalev. That Kalev was uniquely different than the rest of them. Sort of interesting that earlier when he was suggesting that he's going to wipe everybody out and build them out of Moshe, what about Kalev?
Yeah.
Also, what about Yoshua? And we've talked the last class, and I think the one before, we talked about how for some reason God separates Kalev and Yoshua, like in this thing. But that's sort of interesting to wonder about. What would have been with Kalev? Could it be that Kalev would have also been there, but Moshe would have been the father of it, or would Kalev have gone with everybody else? And there it seems to end at verse 25, and then we have this verse about Amalek, which comes up right after that. Yeah, so there's tons of stuff here. There's tons of stuff, but this does seem there's in the relationship between Moshe and God. There seems to be stuff, and there seems to be, Moshe as representative of the people. He's speaking to the people. He's not just speaking to Moshe. And so this is very much about the relationship between God and Moshe. And you just have so many textures and so many layers, and especially, I think, important is this notion that you could be rebelling and angry at God, and God is still holding you while you're being rebelling and angry against him. That notion in the verses itself, that's a very powerful notion, and it's evoked here. It's evoked in after the golden calf, and amongst the most important lessons, I think, for people of our generation who are confronting what it means to have a relationship with God, even if we're not doing the right thing. And what is it, even within society, there are many people who feel outside of society because they chose a lifestyle that breaks the rules. And now they're trying to reconcile the relationship with God. And you can hear in these moments a kind of dialogue with somebody like that. And I know people that are working through addiction and maybe a period of their life where they behaved poorly, and what the consequences of that. Do they have a future? Do they have a place in society? And there's a rich Jewish tradition about this, and about the place of what we call the Baal Tshuva. But the Baal Tshuva is somebody who has, the way we typically understand the Baal Tshuva, they're on the road to repair. They've made a determined decision to do what's right. But here, the language is even to the person who's not there yet, who's not changed. They've not done what's right. There are consequences, as we're going to see. There are consequences, but for that behavior. But there's also this sense that, especially in that teaching of Nosei Avon, Bafesha, that God is like holding you while you're doing it. There's a line that I've heard of. I don't know who is the original coiner of this line, but the line is, even if you don't believe in God, God believes in you. It seems to be, it's much deeper than belief. He's still holding us, he's holding us. And again, I can't help reflecting back on Moshe's early imagery, a nursemaid holding you, not just, and when it says Rav Chesed, he's full of Chesed. Okay, so that is that. And then
Rabbi,
we have,
even though, this part certainly has both the personal relationship connections and the country relationship also, right? What you're talking about at the end. I have it's crazy fantasy. Okay. Even though the people in Egypt are not the same people. Okay.
Yeah.
What if, you brought up Messianic times, and it is true that Hagar was an Egyptian. And what if in Messianic times we could get together? It's Egypt, which is, of all the peoples there, we don't hear about any of the other ones. But Egypt, we do still, there is a country, Egypt. So that's my crazy fantasy, that we could get together.
Yes, well, from your lips to God's ears, as they say.
And we can wipe out Hamas together. Okay.
Yeah.
Which I just find funny, because that's what I'm thinking of with this verse 25. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites, when it brings up Amalekites right away.
I know.
You have the Amalekites and the Canaanites. I don't, this line, you could say the fact this line is here is a decision of Christian scholars who actually divided up the chapters. But even in the Masoretic text, it's connected to, in other words, even according to our Jewish tradition, it's connected to what was just said, and the break only comes after this line. In mine, I don't know, it depends on what Chumash you're using, but if you look on the Hebrew side of the text, there's a pay. That's an indication of a certain amount of space that's left to indicate the end of a chapter or a paragraph. And so it seems, even according to the Masoretic text, that this line was meant to be connected to what was before, and not to what is coming next. Eventually, this is going to matter, because there are going to be some people who try to fix what happened, and they're going to decide that they want to start the conquest of Israel. They just go in. These people just rush into Canaan as a conquering force. Jews trying to fix what happened with the spies, and they get wiped out by these people referenced in verse 25. It's a tragedy, and in the aftermath of it. So it seems like that it's here for that foreshadowing purpose. But it's interesting that right next to this final words of God about Kalev, we have the mention of the Amalekites, which is what we have there. And that's how chapter 25, the verse 25 ends. And then we have this little break, and the chapter's gonna go forward from verse 26. We're gonna stop here, and we'll wait till next time to dive into verse 26 and beyond. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to learn together.
We are too.
I look
Yes,
forward
we-
to being able to do it again.
And
Thank
Next
you,
week.
Rabbi.
All right.
Pardon?
Be well, everybody.
Be well.
Have a
Okay.
good Shabbos.
Good
Good
Shabbos.
job, us all.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.